Good morning and welcome to the 13th session of the webinar series, Reimagining the Future, a People's Agenda for a Post-COVID Economy. Preceding this series, we had another one named Solidarity Series, Conversation During Lockdown and Beyond, where we had 17 sessions where we spoke about the impact of lockdown on different sections of the population and aspects of economy, be it migrant workers, women, transgenders, human rights, banking, economy, or issues like exclusion, climate crisis, state surveillance, or capitalism. The outcome of that series was a coming together of a large number of people's movements and civil society organizations to collectively develop a people's agenda for a post-COVID economy. Starting on May 15th, holding 2 webinars per week on Tuesdays and Fridays, we had a number of eminent speakers in these sessions, bringing in vast experience and knowledge from their years of activism and involvement with the issues. The sessions were participated by a diverse audience, a good number of them practitioners and experts, whose questions and inputs during the session brought the best out of each speaker. Today's session is on international financial institutions and whether they are using the cover of the pandemic to tighten their grip over economies. The session is moderated by Dr. Sanjay MG, a retired professor of mechanical engineering from Mumbai's VJTI and an untiring activist for the past several decades. He was associated with Samajwadi Jan Parishad and National Alliance of People's Movements for many decades, apart from his association and leadership at a number of small and big initiatives around Thane in Maharashtra, where he resides. Sanjay's area of research are renewable energy and renewabilization of cities through a bottom-up approach. Unfortunately, one of the speakers, Leo Saldana, is unable to join today due to a last-minute emergency at home, but we are sure that we have other speakers who will cover a wide range of topics here. The session is simultaneously translated in Hindi, switched to French. Zoom decides which names of the languages to carry. So switch to French and you will get to hear Hindi. As a request for speakers to speak slowly because of the simultaneous translation. If you have questions, put it in the chat box. This is also projected live on Facebook Live. Questions from Facebook will be passed on to the moderator. With this, I will hand over the forum to Sanjay MG.
It's really nice to meet you all. I can see Dr. Meera Shiva, Himanshu Damle, Vijayan, Ashok Chaudhary ji, Suhas Kolekar, Sadhna Dadich, Rajkumar Sinha, and many more.
Sanjay.
And the topic is also of very much of importance. This foreign funding or financial institutes infiltrating in any countries under the cover of help or emergency support. And when you go into the details, they are not really help or support. They are all lendings, borrowings and debt and with clear conditions. And many a times when we are fighting situation like COVID, we are concerned about health issues. We are concerned about lockdown. We are concerned about migrant workers. And in the meantime, country decides on behalf of all of us, country in the sense the rulers, about various agreements which are being pushed by the institutions which are known for that. And we have a long history. Any natural disaster, any such event in India or any other similar country, you can see such things have happened where institutions, these international finance institutions and so-called development banks, they try to push their agenda, and therefore this is of much of importance. As Joe said, Leo is not with us today, so we have 3 speakers. I guess first hour we can give to the speakers 15 to 17, 18 minutes, and then another 45, 50 minutes we will have for question answer and discussion. As this series has rightly put, one of the aim of conducting these sessions is to look forward, not merely the understanding the situation, but trying to suggest the alternatives, the way for future, what can we do as a NGO sector or people's movements. So that aspect also we would like to explore towards the end in this discussion. So we have very knowledgeable group of speakers amongst us. Maju Varghese, who you may be knowing as a representing CFA now, but I know him representing College of Social Work, to UA, to NAPM, to Kerala Movement Groups, to NBA. So many his caps that he has wore, and uh, has justified it and given good support to all these movements and actively involved in this. So now this financial aspect that he would like to bring in the larger context of continuing their agenda, these financial institutes, how do they do? So that aspect we would like to hear from Maju and other important aspects. Yes, Maju, welcome and please start. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjay ji, for the kind words. Um, I have a presentation, so I'm sharing the screen. Good morning, everyone. So what I will be doing is I'll be presenting the larger context and how the international financial institutions influence countries and what's happening now. And the subsequent speakers will go directly into COVID funding and aspects related to that. So as we speak today, yesterday, June 25th, happens to be the day in which the World Bank started work. So it's about 76 years of World Bank. 1944, after the Bretton Woods Conference, the agreements came into place. And as we know, the context in which the IFIs came into being, particularly the Bretton Woods institutions, where after the Second World War, where the victorious countries had a dominance over the creation of the institution per se, and they modeled it in their image and what they wanted their capital to have, predominance across the world. Even after the 76 years, the financial institutions, the international financial institutions, almost mirror the same framework. It is modeled and it reflects the imperial powers and their capital interest, rather than taking into account the changed circumstances in terms of the rising of the emerging economies, their quota and their voting share in the financial institutions and the like. So it still serves as it mirrors the old power equations post World War. India at that point of time had argued that World Bank and IMF should be within the framework of the United Nations and not as a separate body altogether. However, the Economic and Social Council at that point of time trying its best. The powers at that point of time could extract from UN a special permission, so that though they are a specialized UN body, they are not within the and though they are also within the UN family, it is not actually the kind of in the democratic institution what UN aspires to be, and it's governed very differently, controlled by controlled in a very different way, having predominance of private interest. In earlier days itself, the World Bank and the international financial institutions had created IFC, but the idea comes much later. The development for concessional funding. So it itself reflects the kind of the thought at that point of time, and the idea of course came because India, Yugoslavia, and other countries exerted pressure in UN to create similar body within the UN itself. Um, there has been, however, a kind of campaign which is happening for the last few years, that India has not been taking funds from the World Bank or other financial institutions. But if you look into the into this graph which I've put forth, so India was among the top borrowers from the World Bank, which is true both for the IBRDA funds and the IDA funds. And even after 2015, India continues to be one of the largest borrowers from the World Bank. So in um, uh, so that also brings the kind of influence the World Bank has within the country. But if we look into the India's external debt, the percentage of multilateral funding to India in the external debt is around 10.68%, and much of this lending is happening outside the institutional framework of multilateral development agencies, whether it is World Bank, ADB, AIB, NDB, or IFC, or I mean the entire gamut of in the family, or even the bilateral funding. It's mostly in the external commercial borrowings where Indian debt is entered. So we have two situations: India being the largest borrower from these institutions, and within India, it is only a small percentage of India's debt. However, the influence of these institutions in the country has been much more than what they were lending, and this has been told again and again within the country. And we find generally three ways in which they influence through the lending, they influence through the research and the knowledge products, and also the recent influences they have through multiple ways in which they work as a gatekeeper, not just for itself but for other private financiers or private financing to come to India. So they are the gatekeepers in that count. So if you look into the lending of these institutions, we will find one, the investment project financing, which is more related with the activities for creating physical and social infrastructure, whether it is for highways, roads, schools, health institutions, etc., etc. And at the same time, you will also find another set of loans which comes with a different set of conditionalities, which are the development policy loans, which is not related to support to a specific project per se, but to support it's a budget support for the government, but based on particular conditions, which is met which has to be met with prior actions and what they call also as triggers. So there are a set of actions as policy recommendations which has to be fulfilled for the development policy loans to be availed, and also a certain kind of results which has to be met, which is to be triggers. And then of course the private sector options, which is through IFC and MEGA, which is now being pushed. So in the development policy financing, what we see, I mean, post-COVID, we have been seeing that post-floods in Kerala, we have been seeing development policy loans coming to India, which the subsequent speakers will be talking about. But taking you to this study, which Eurodad did in 2019, based on the development policy loans of the year 2017, where they had about 53 development policy operations in 46 countries. And when they unbundled all the conditionalities, there are about 509 conditionalities which were inbuilt in all these loans. And they also came up with this finding that it is in 5 key areas these loans are being conditionalities which are being kept, which is in economic policy, the increasing the role of the private sector in public financial management, agriculture, and social protection. We all know about the ease of doing business, ease of doing agriculture, the private-public partnerships, the physical discipline which they are pushing. So there's a set of policies which brings in conditionalities much more than the project financing does. And one thing which has to be seen is that prior to receiving development policy loan, the recipient country must have an IMF seal of approval for country's macroeconomic framework. So this is how these institutions talk to each other and make sure that the countries go in through structural adjustment. The development policy loans, if we could see, in other words, this is coming after the adjustment loans, which were earlier there. Now they are called the development policy loans. That brings into the role of IMF, the other sister, in terms of their role in influencing policies, not just in the development policy loans. One thing which I may be overlooking many other things, but one thing I would like to emphasize about their financial surveillance, which IMF does with all its member countries. Every year IMF engages with the government and the central government, and also with other trade associations, FICCIs, and even trade unions in some sense, in evaluating a country and bringing out a country report. And this report will have an executive director's seal and recommendations to each country. And if we look into some of these recommendations made by the surveillance report, which also require the country to go strong with the financial sector assessment, which World Bank and IMF does together. So they intertwine themselves to push for a set of policy reforms in this manner. The last surveillance report of India had come in December 2019. So every year there is a report which comes into being. And if we look into some of the changes which is happening, the policy changes and the IMF recommendations, we would be able to make a correlation in terms of how they are influencing influencing our policy. So if we look into the their appreciation in terms of the financial and structural reforms, the implementation of the reforms in GST, the IBC, the steps to liberalize FDI, and improving ease of doing business. So these are directions, signal posts which are being given to the country. The surveillance report has also been very strong in asking for the restructuring of the public sector banks in the country. They had pointed to a large government presence in public banking, and they had commented on the merging of the PSB. They had said that the mere merging of the banks is not enough. It has to be accompanied by deep operational restructuring and far-reaching governance reforms in order to improve efficiency, risk management, and credit allocation. So one could generally connect it with the Narasimham committee recommendations and the kind of reforms which came after the 1991 liberalization process. Um, so let me also put one slide more about what they have been saying about the country. The directors commended, the executive directors, their report commended the authorities concerned efforts to strengthen the business climate. The efforts needs to be complemented by continued labor, product market, land, and other reforms aimed at increasing labor market flexibility, enhancing competition, reducing the scope of corruption. Why I am saying is that some of the policy reforms which we currently see as part of the Nirmala Sitharaman package 2 or the COVID relief package is also linked with the recommendations which the Article 4 consultation has also done with India. So they have recommended the agriculture, the land reforms in agriculture, land titling, and other reforms in the agriculture, which will make agriculture more commercial oriented and corporate oriented. So the set of connections they build through these surveillance reports. We also see this the country partnership framework, which gives the roadmap for the World Bank institutions in the country. And one thing which I would like to focus here is about this focus on state partnerships in this country partnership framework. The idea of state partnerships is not new. I mean, from 1995, World Bank has been looking into state partnerships, both in starting with Argentina, India, Indonesia, China, Brazil. So these big countries all have the World Bank focused state partnerships involved. The state partnership in India, particularly in the last decade or so, has been a mixed experience. But World Bank has been able to push privatization, particularly in the power sector, in Orissa and in many other states. Through the state partnerships. So these state partnerships then act as a way in which the states have been supported to move towards a more liberalized regime, more privatization, and the kind of push which the World Bank does, which earlier used to be there with the central government, is coming to both at the state level and at the city level. Where a World Bank mirrored development agenda used to be pushed. So you have lots of technical advisors. You have the development policy loans again working at the subnational level to make those changes, and we have seen that in Punjab, in Tamil Nadu, in Andhra Pradesh, and of course Orissa now coming up with again privatization of the electric sector after the failed attempt earlier again right now. This year's country partnership framework talks about the development of strategic state partnership to serve as laboratories for effective implementation practices around country partnerships objectives and themes. So what the World Bank is now trying to see is to create new laboratories for their agenda of privatization and liberalization at the state level. The state level push is World Bank trying, or the IFI is trying to push the unfinished agenda of economic reforms in 1991. So many of the reforms they understood that cannot happen unless the state, which has in a country like India has much, a federal country like India has a certain set of powers and a certain set of financial strength, that has to be pushed not just to be the central government where there is a stagnation at one level and there is a push at another level, but to bring it down at the state level. This has, my colleagues will talk about that with the post-COVID and post-disaster situation has been accelerated through this country partnership framework. The World Bank influence in a country like India, we have seen it over the last 1 decade. Many of the states have taken these loans and have been pushed into a situation where they had to privatize both the power sector, the municipal services, etc. And one thing which would be relevant to point out here is the World Bank's work with ease of business and trying to create the subnational ranking based on which each state ranks the kind of reforms and implementing the reforms and assessing it based on a business action reform plan, which World Bank helped co-create India to move up the ease of doing business ladder. So from 2015, after the first Modi government came into being, they had this agreement with the World Bank, which helped create such a ranking and assessment, which has also resulted in massive reforms across the country. In the Parliament question, they have talked about 7,000 reforms across the country. In the World Economic Forum, Narendra Modi was talking about the 10,000 plus reforms which has been carried out at the subnational level, and because the World Bank could create such an index where the states compete with each other to attract private finances, and that is the way in which they push for policy reforms. The idea of competitive federalism, where they have to fight to get resources both from the center and the World Bank. Even now, during the COVID package, we have seen that many of the reforms have been linked to the fact that certain financial assistance is linked to the fact that certain reforms have to be met by the state. It's not just about World Bank funding. We have seen that in Kerala funds and also in the COVID funds, that and in many other things. The World Bank is not just about funding anymore. It also gives the kind of platform in which many other not just the multilateral development banks, but also the bilateral agencies and private financing come together and have a collective platform created in terms of funding channels. So this approach of collectivizing and World Bank being a gatekeeper of holding both private and multilateral funds is something which we need to look in. Coming into reimagining series, we will have those discussions towards the end. So that's all for now. Maybe I could come back at during the discussion stage. Thank you. Over to you, Sanjay ji.
Thank you so much, Maju, for setting the tone for the discussion and elaborately mentioning how these international financial institutes, especially World Bank, is dealing, who are the leading borrowers from the World Bank, how does it behave, how different states are made to rank themselves and do the reforms. All these things are important when we go ahead for the discussion. And I will request participants to hold on with their questions. Later, we will finish up the presentation from all the three presenters, and then we will take up the question answer. So now I invite Sridhar Ramamurthy, who we know deals with or associated with Environmix Trust, and is also on NGO forum of ADB. The manner in which World Bank and other institutes are reinventing themselves so that they can push themselves in this whole changing scenario is also very important. Before we go to Anuradha, where she will elaborate on the COVID package in particular, I request Sridhar to start.
Yeah. Good morning, everybody, and very glad to be with all of you. I have a presentation which I'll start, so I'll share my screen. So COVID as a cover for enhanced international finance. I have divided my presentation into two parts. One is just to give you an idea of what is the big money, totally that the big four banks have been talking about. I have not looked at the EBRD or the banks which are in the other part of the world, but largely that put in money in Asia. So if we look at it, the big boy, the first one is of course the World Bank. The World Bank, in order to strengthen health systems and disease surveillance, that is what what World Bank is saying. So please remember that, what Maju said, it is not only financial surveillance, it will also be disease surveillance or other kind of things that opens up medical market, pharma markets. So about $8 billion is what World Bank has, is putting it in, during this COVID, for the COVID. Plus, there will be another 6 billion that the International Finance Corporation will put in. So, if you look at that, what the International Finance Corporation will put in will be in terms of infrastructure, manufacturing, agriculture. So, this is an opportunity to kind of go into several sectors. Then the second, tranche of 2 billion is for global trade finance program, and the third 2 billion is for working capital solutions. So there is 14 billion dollars, which is say roughly 1 lakh crores from World Bank. Then we have the new kid in the block, the Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank, which says that over the next 18 months, it will invest somewhere between $5 to $10 billion. So you can see it has kept itself a huge kind of leeway. And the funds are meant for immediate health sector. Again, a broad term called economic resilience. And also, another broad term like addressing liquidity constraints in infrastructure and other productive sectors. The other new bank, which is the New Development Bank, this also has, a similar kind of fund of $5 to $10 billion in what it calls as crisis-related assistance, and including support for economic recovery. So you find that these two new banks are giving themselves a very wide space of what they can actually invest upon. And if we look at the ADB, which is again another old hat in the game, ADB has announced about $7 billion. And also one of the ADB's documents says that, if we look at all the members, that is, all the countries which are now trying to recover from COVID, and their own internal packages like the, 20 lakh crores that Indian government talked about, or 2 lakh, or the hundreds of lakhs of crores that our government talks about. The biggest one, of course, is the US, which has $6 trillion as its package. Japan has about 3 trillion. So if you find, about more than 50% is of the, the kind of, the recovery packages or monies are among the top 5 or 6 countries. And the rest of the 50% is the kind of other countries, how they are trying to, so you are likely to see a huge amount of inequality of investment that comes up, post COVID. Now this slide, which I have taken again from one of ADB's, recent work, is that this 31 to 41 billion dollars, that is roughly 3 lakh crores that these 4 banks are going to put in, they would not be any kind of a loan. These days what we are calling it as blended finance, various kinds of instruments which are there. So the monies will come to different kinds of entities. A central bank will get it. Then the central bank will swap some old loans to new loans, which may have been higher interest rates. Then it will provide some more liquidity to banks that they can lend more, or they can give it to the bank, which will again give liquidity or encourage private credit, like the Indian government has been talking about. So what you find is that when these days we are talking about money, it is no longer the money of the kind that we know. Because money itself is a product now of various dimensions and in various kinds of forms. So when we say this kind of money, like $23 trillion, or currently what the 4 banks are talking about as COVID recovery money, they are they're of this kind of variety, where the government will leverage. For instance, here the arrows are showing proportionality of the kind of funds we are talking about. So the money comes to the government then, the direct income support, if you see, that is what probably will go to people. The rest of the money will all be kind of cycled through various kind of mechanisms. So what I am going to talk next is about
Either can we request Anuradha in the meantime to begin, and you can sort out the difficulty and then begin after Anuradha.
Hello.
Hello, Anuradha, can you begin?
Yeah, sure.
Please,
Sure,
please.
I can.
We will take up Anuradha, who is from Center for Financial Accountability, known to us for dealing with these issues extensively, and especially COVID-19, what has done to India, that she is highlighting. Anuradha.
Yes. To begin with, to set the context for the COVID financing, we need to look at the way multilateral development banks like the World Bank have used post-disaster situations to drive in the agenda of structural reforms, which started way back in the 90s in India. Post-disaster rehabilitation and recovery programs provide institutions an easy entry with little resistance to the massive policy reforms that come along with them. Also, the language of resilience and sustainability is built into the narrative, which generally find very little resistance. Just taking examples from what has happened in India in the recent past only, in 2013, Uttarakhand received heavy rainfall causing flash floods and extensive landslides. In the aftermath, a joint rapid damage and needs assessment report was prepared by the World Bank and ADB, was prepared by the World Bank and ADB in response to the request from the Department of Economic Affairs, Government of India, and the Government of Uttarakhand. And this was undertaken jointly by all of them. This report became the basis of damages assessment due to the disaster and formulating the recovery framework. So it's like these institutions are intrinsically linked with assessments, with monitoring, with developing frameworks for the government. So this is the kind of hold they have. This was followed by World Bank approving the Uttarakhand Disaster Recovery Project for India to restore housing, rural connectivity, and build resilience of communities in Uttarakhand, and to increase technical capacity of the state entities to respond to the emergency. Similarly, in Kerala, the same pattern after the floods of 2018 and 2019 was followed. Joint assessment by Government of India, Kerala, ADB, World Bank was done, which resulted in 500 million loan in 2018 and 150 million development policy loan in 2019. Government of Kerala commissioned the post-disaster need assessment in September 2018, and it was jointly developed by international development partners, European Union, World Bank, and the UN system. Furthermore, they were then involved in the disaster management policy, in the state water policy, gender equity and women's empowerment policies in Kerala. The most problematic aspect of these projects is that they are linked with policy reforms. They focus on priority sectors of the bank for restructuring under the garb of rebuilding and reconstruction. These sectors include water supply, sanitation, solid waste management, transport, agriculture, infrastructure, all important sectors you can actually think of. The World Bank's long-standing agenda of privatization is actualized through these reforms. Post 2013 till now, India has witnessed some major disasters. The responsiveness of the bank to these disasters has been of an opportunity for impending economic and governance response. Under the garb of disaster preparedness, rebuilding, building resilient infrastructure. We have similar experiences in other countries as well, particularly in Nepal post the earthquake in 2015, where World Bank was involved in housing reconstruction, additional financing, budget support, roads, reallocated funds for healthcare, etc. Post 2004 tsunami in Indonesia, India, Sri Lanka, Maldives, Somalia, and Seychelles were the worst hit. All these countries received massive investments for reconstruction and recovery. These investments linked with building public services and institutional capabilities were which invariably tampered and restructured the local governance systems in these countries. In Indonesia particularly, the multilaterals, including the World Bank and Asian Development Bank, were quick in responding to reconstruction needs. They have both given soft loans to Indonesia with project loans worth 1.1 billion, and the policy reform support loan. The bank pushed for privatization and other new regulations that would support economic liberalization. From this loan came Indonesia's new law on oil, gas, and electricity that allowed for privatization of state enterprises. More recently, Indonesia, post the earthquake and tsunami in 2018, World Bank announced 1 billion support to supplement relief and reconstruction work and to foster long-term resilience. The proposed 1.1 billion package included standalone emergency recovery program to finance rebuilding critical public facilities and infrastructure assets. These were hospitals, schools, roads, highways, water supply infrastructure. These are all critical social sector which come under the important social structure framework. With this, the World Bank and other MDBs in post-disaster situations have taken over the roles of assessment, planning, and financing projects, and providing development policy loans and monitoring as well. It is essential to decode and unpackage this language of resilience, sustainability, and post-disaster recovery. With increase in natural disasters in this decade and with climate change realities, disaster capitalism has become a reality. Through disaster lending, they have pushed massive reforms, privatization, tourism, and infrastructure development. And we need to set this response to IFI COVID lending within this context. Also, I think World Bank president made its intentions extremely clear when in the G20 finance ministers call, he made the statement, and I quote, countries will need to implement structural reforms to help shorten the time to recovery and create confidence that the recovery can be strong. For these countries that have excessive regulations, subsidies, licensing regimes, trade protection, and litigiousness as obstacles, we will work with them to foster markets, choice, and faster growth prospects during the recovery. So this kind of set the tone for what was going to come when we were talking about loans. And within this context, we need to set the packages that have come for India. If we currently look at the total funding that has come from MDBs, which includes the World Bank, Asian Development Bank, Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, and New Development Bank, this is close to 5.5 billion US dollars that are coming in, of which the World Bank is funding 1.75 billion, Asian Development Bank 1.5, Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank 1.25 billion, and New Development Bank 1 billion. And these are totally coming into, I think the packages are close to like 10 loans that we are getting. Now, particularly looking at the World Bank, there are two projects that were immediately provided funds for loans for. One was the COVID-19 Emergency Response Health Systems Preparedness Project. This is a development policy operation. When we say development policy operation, it means the funds will be are made available to the client based on maintenance of adequate macroeconomic policy framework as determined by the bank with inputs from IMF assessment, satisfactory implementation of overall reform program, completion of a set of critical policy and institutional actions agreed between the bank and the client. So these are some of the prerequisites and components of a development policy operation. Particularly looking at this project, it is to bring in emergency response, strengthening national and state health systems to support prevention and preparedness, strengthening pandemic research, and multi-sector national institutions and platforms for One Health, community engagement and risk communication, implementation, management, capacity building, monitoring and evaluation, contingency, emergency response component. The project will be managed by three entities within the Ministry of Health and Family Affairs. And these three would be the National Health Mission, National Center for Disease Control, and Indian Council of Medical Research. In addition, private sector engagement will be done through states and central agencies to surge the capacity of laboratory and intensive care services for COVID-19. The other package is the Social Protection Response Program. This is a development policy loan. The program development objective of the proposed operation is to strengthen capability of state and national governments in India to provide coordinated and adequate social protection to the poor and vulnerable from the impacts of COVID-19 pandemic. It is a development policy loan and will fundamentally change the nature of social protection in the country. This loan supports some of the measures already announced in the financial package: 3 months ration, direct beneficiary transfer, One Nation, One Card. Also, there are 8 prior actions. What are prior actions associated with this loan? Prior actions are policy and institutional actions deemed critical to achieving the objectives of the program supported by development policy financing operation. These present the legal terms defined in the loan agreement that have to be met for each operation before disbursement of the tranches of the funds. So basically, to access the next fund, the fund that is divided into different tranches, they need to make certain policy changes and certain conditionalities fulfilled before they can receive the second tranche of and the third tranche, consecutive tranches of the funds. Just to summarize what we are actually looking at when we are looking at some of these loans, not only World Bank, but also looking at the funds that are coming from ADB and the funds that are coming from AIIB and NDB. First of all, we need to understand these are loans, these are not grants. We have to pay interest. So, so this whole providing of support and this language of providing support is slightly misleading because we have to pay back. These are loans that are being given to us. Secondly, not much details are available. If you actually go into the project information documents, they are very ambiguous. They have very generic language and very little details. So there is always a fear that it can encompass any major policy decisions without being specific or transparent about how they are doing it and what exactly they are doing. Also, being development policy loans, these lendings are used to consolidate their hold on the economy. I mean, the IFIs consolidate their hold on the economy. Similarly, it's an emergency priorities, COVID responses being decided and directed by the World Bank and other institutions. Primarily, World Bank is the leader in deciding some of these priorities. World Bank involvement in social protection programs, prescription for social protection reforms has been before COVID-19 also. This current post-disaster situation is being used to further this agenda and much more aggressively, because right now it is a perfect environment for them to use this emergency to push in any agenda they want to. Another very, very important aspect that we need to look at is how they have interlinked and supported private sector investments, private sector interests through these COVID funds. One of the examples is the use of data. The bank is using the current situation as an excuse to bring in gathering and use of data and data collection along with health systems management. This includes collection of personal data and data that may not feature in the national law and governance. With the next World Development Project, World Development Report for 2021 focused on data for development, the World Bank is using COVID emergency to push its design for using data as a commercial good. To quote from the project document, Accelerating India's COVID-19 Social Protection Response, I'm just going to read out. The portion of the program supported under the first development policy operation of the series will not require collection of new data, but exclusively rely on existing data collected by various existing social protection programs involved. However, for the second development policy operation in the series, large volumes of personal data, personally identifiable information, and sensitive data are likely to be collected, exchanged, and used in connection with the management of COVID-19 outbreak under circumstances where measures to ensure the legitimate, appropriate, and proportionate use and processing of the data may not feature in national law, data governance regulations, or be routinely collected and managed in health information system. Secondly, World Bank is facilitating markets for private sector. The role and the interest of the World Bank is intertwined with those of private sector. The bank is the co-convener for the Global Pandemic Supply Chain Network, which has identified a list of medical products critical to the response, and the bank is working closely with WHO to support Government of India to plan and procure medical supplies and equipment to effectively respond to COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic supply chain network's role is to create and manage a market network allowing for WHO and private sector partners to access any supply of chain functionality and asset from end to end anywhere in the world at any scale. So these are massive interests. We are talking about pharmaceutical companies, we are talking about equipment providers for medical equipment providers, and this is not the only supply chain or network they are co-conveners from. There are multiple others. We are still in the process of trying to understand where all the interests of World Bank lie at this point of time, but this seems to be a very, very critical one. Further, the role of the bank is much beyond that funding emergency response and COVID crisis. It has taken multiple roles of crowd financing, setting up multilateral funds, and channeling bilateral funds. For example, the bank crowds in financing and support from bilateral and multilateral agencies. This includes parallel financing of 200 million euros from AFT, 416 million euros from the German KfW, Japanese International Cooperation Agency, JICA, and New Development Bank are also exploring potential parallel financing. The World Bank Group is also planning to establish a new Health Emergency Preparedness and Response Multi-Donor Fund. This new fund's purpose is to respond to immediate health consequences of the pandemic and bolster economic recoveries of countries. Japan has already expressed its intention to become the founding donor for the new Health Emergency Preparedness and Multi-Donor Response Multi-Donor Fund, which is now open for contributions from all donor countries. Apart from this, changing terms and conditions of existing loans is also explained. They are also trying to complement through the function of complementarity, associate the previous programs that are already going on in the sector of health and education to align with the new programs that have come in for the COVID. In fact, the government of India has also requested a World Bank to recommit 500 million in IDA cancellations to development policy credit to support mitigation and social and economic impacts of the health emergency. We do not know what the details are, how that would change the interest rates or anything. These things are still not clear, but these are the lines on which it is being explored. Apart from this, World Bank, Asian Development Bank is providing technical assistance support and technical assistance fund, and also two technical assistance funds for COVID, strengthening universal health coverage in India, supporting the implementation of Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, and there is another project for 1.5 billion USD, which is Active Response and Expenditure Support Program. It is built upon previous and ongoing health sector operations and policy dialogue. Since the first health sector operations in India in 2013, through the support of National Urban Health Mission, ADB's health sector engagement has been increasing. ADB is now developing a program to support delivery of comprehensive primary health care in urban areas. And this is a project that is in pipeline. They have not come out with the details yet. They are also looking at support to address outbreak of COVID-19 and strengthen preparedness of communicable diseases. It is a special fund and again a technical assistance fund. So if you just look at it, ADB's role is no different. Through their involvement in National Urban Health Mission, ADB's health sector engagement has been increasing. Following the launch of Ayushman Bharat in 2018, implementation of NUHM under the National Health Mission, ADB is now developing a program to support delivery of comprehensive primary health care in urban areas. COVID funds are being used to push their already existing agenda in reforming the health sector in India. AIIB has provided two funds. Both of them are, one is supporting the World Bank project. It's a co-financing project, and the second ADB project, second co-financing project they have is with ADB. So basically, even though AIB has committed huge amount of money, it is riding on the back of World Bank and Asian Development Bank, and basically exhibiting little commitment to accountability. The total lending is not huge for a 3 trillion economy and whose annual budget is over rupees 25 lakh crore. But the influence to change the economy and the mosaic of this country is huge and disproportionate to their lending. The entry of these post-disaster funds without any critical analysis is dangerous. The ambiguity in the language is something we need to be extremely careful of. What the current with the ideas of uh, support, the idea of support that MDBs are providing is extremely dangerous because it is coming with policy changes, it is coming with policy reforms, and this needs to be decoded, this needs to be unpacked and understood. And we require to monitor and engage and challenge these funds, not just for the money, but for the changes it is bringing to the landscape of this country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anuradha, for explaining in detail what is going to happen or what is happening in India post-COVID and how things are in the pipeline, and what, like your presentation as must have created amongst the participants the ideas how we will have to counter this. But before going for that discussion and question answer session, I will request Sridhar to finish wherever he got interrupted because of technical problem. Sridhar.
Thank you, Sanjay, and sorry for disruption. I had anticipated this because the power shutdown was there, but yet we could not manage in time. So I'm just restarting my presentation. Essentially, if you look at some of these figures that Anuradha mentioned, I think a little more digging into the documents reveals something more. If you look at many of these are, as I said, financed by a couple of people together. So one is a 1.5 billion one, which was given in May. That was the World Bank and AIB. That was 1.5 billion, where 1 billion came from World Bank and another 0.5 from AIB. Then this was followed by ADB and AIB, which was another $2.25 billion. Now, what was this first one that was meant for? This $1.5 billion was the emergency COVID response, state health, as she mentioned about the health systems project. But what is interesting is the covenants, key covenants. I want you to look at the slide carefully. Like what were the conditions on which this 1.5 billion was given? It says that all it requires is an establishment of a project governing committee and a project, just the committees, adoption of a project implementation manual, establishment of technical support units, and there are no disbursement conditions. There are absolutely no conditions for disbursement. The other very interesting thing, which provokes me into thinking, deeper about politics in India, is that this loan has got a clause which says, there is a retroactive financing, and both in terms of the money that can be used and the dates. So out of that money, 40% could have been used for any expenditure which you can show between 1st January and the legal date of agreement. That means 4,500 crores was available to this government, for expenditure from January to May that they could show. And I don't know how, until 23rd of March, like when we knew of the lockdown, there was no thinking of this. So why this kind of a leeway must be given. It begs that question. The second, component, has 6 components. This has 6 components, which is the emergency COVID response, strengthening national state health system, strengthening pandemic research, and community engagement and risk communication, implementation management, and contingent emergency response component. So you find that this community engagement or contingent emergency response component, like they should have been spending that money beyond what the other amount that is being told is what is this PM CARE. The objective of the program is to provide this $2.25 billion. The AIB ADB loan is meant to be to provide for the adverse socio-economic impacts. And what is that adverse socio-economic response is what recently was announced by the people. That was by the government. That was this 500 rupees that they said they were giving for 3 months. And so there was no baseline who will receive this money, but 50 million poor women to receive this 3 months, 500 rupees each. Then there were 20 million poor senior citizens who were to get money around $14 each. And then 60 million farmers who were supposed to receive 2,000 rupees. So this is all based on March 2020, and there is no baseline, and whom they have given, we don't know. The then of course some more of PM's Ujjwala connection, 60 million more poor, that is 6 crore more women to get this. Then 50% more beneficiaries for higher wages in NREGA, and the Provident Fund money, about 400 million for Provident Fund contributions, which incidentally, if you remember, the finance minister said in one of her packages that some of the corporates need not give their component of the PF contribution because of the kind of problems that the corporates are facing. So the independent accountability mechanism, if you see what is the accountability, then they say that, for this project, though the general project is there, but this will not be, accountable, will not be submissions under this program would not be eligible for, going and complaining or looking at, what are the issues concerned with their project, monitoring program. So what this government has actually done is it has tested with the New Development Bank. On April 30th itself, it took away $1 billion from the New Development Bank. And I have a very, kind of a feeling that, we heard during that time that Mr. Kamath might come back as India's finance minister, whose term was ending in the New Development Bank. And we got $1 billion. And if you see, it has like the AIB, this money is also, like open money. It has money to, the program includes healthcare and emergency response, strengthening social safety net. And for onward containment and up to the March 2021. So if we just look at, from the day the lockdown started today to this day, approximately the government of India had 4,500 crore rupees to spend each day. Now, whether what has been done is commensurate with it or not, we don't know. But when you say that, you can spend money, you got $1 billion from the New Development Bank on April 30th, that was just 7 days after the lockdown. And they say that the money is fully disbursed. Then all this money you could have used from January onwards, it raises doubts about where this money is being used and how it is being used. So the to me, the moot question is like, who has learned, from whom, whether the Indian government, like Anuradha and, earlier Maju said how the World Bank and others have influenced policies. But, over the years, I think, our governments have become even more cleverer. And so they have been able to negotiate funds for expenditures which were not anticipated even before this COVID and the emergency. Or the government of India knew on 1st of January itself that this was going to be a very big problem and hid the problem from us. So to conclude my presentation, there is this notorious statement of our Prime Minister that someone was taking bath in the shower with a raincoat. But what this government currently is doing seems to be that you can be in Mumbai rains without a raincoat, and yet you are bone dry at the end of the day. So I would like to provoke all of you to look at where this money, it's not small money, close to about 3 lakh crores of money that has been taken on loan. And there was a question on the chat box which I found, what is the interest rate? You can see a link in the World Bank. The real interest rate might actually come to about 9 to 10%. It's not some free money. Though the actual interest rate mentioned is about 3.5 to 4.5, but the way it is structured, and if you look at it, so the World Bank itself has this thing which says the real interest rate. So one should look at that in terms of what the burden that this COVID is going to put on each one of us. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Sridhar and Anuradha and Maju as well. There are a few questions in front of us. We will take them up, and what we will do is I will mention the questions and then speaker can respond quickly so that we will have enough time for the rest of the discussion from the people who are present in the discussion, and they might also wanted to add especially about the future course. Maju, you have few questions from Thomas, Himanshu and Ashok Chaudhary ji. This one point was which Sridhar mentioned, what is the interest rate? How do you see World Bank and IMF's fluctuating growth rates for India? Do you think they are in tune with what rating agencies foretell? In the post-pandemic times, almost every other rating for India is dismal, and still the populist logic speaks otherwise. So how do you see a nexus between these agencies and economic growth? That is, even if one were to undermine GDP as a growth parameter. And Ashok ji has asked you about, you said that IFIs have suggested land reform to government. What kind of land reform IFIs are suggesting? Is it reform or looting? Like, as usual, the nomenclature and the language, as Anuradha mentioned, used by these agencies and the actual thing that they do are totally 180-degree apart. So please elaborate on the concrete impact of such financing on common people. Rajendra Ravi has asked about World Bank को रोकने के लिए क्या करना होगा, which is there in the future discussion, whatever time we will have. So Maju, can you throw light on any of these points?
Thank you. The growth statistics from IMF is confusing to me, like many of you. I mean, the kind of projections they make and the revisions they make seems, is going unquestioned. There needs to be some civil society initiative to really look into some of their projections, and many of their projections have been failing, especially during the last from the last year in terms of the Indian growth scenario. I do not have any more intelligence to speak in terms of what is prompting IMF to push for such growth rates, and why are they failing miserably. Maybe Himanshu, if you yourself have a comment, we could um, hear, hear that. With related to the land reforms, Ashokji, that has been one of the key questions or the key issues which the World Bank has been pushing. So if you remember, even during the first Modi government, the first attack was on the land bill. So though it was subsequently rolled back, um, it has found multiple mentions in various documents which World Bank has been pushing with India. It may start with land titling. It may start with having ease in terms of land acquisition, and we ourselves know the kind of reforms they are suggesting to take away the public hearing, the social assessment, etc. So this is much part of not just World Bank, but also if you have been following the AIB general body which happened in Mumbai, the same thing, the land, labor, and environment have been the three major assaults which the international financial institutions wants right now to water down even the existing regulations, so that corporate farming can happen, for that land acquisition can take place. Even the country partnership framework is pushing for those reforms, specifically in terms of acquiring land for infrastructure projects, land titling. And World Bank has a different set of reforms called the ease of doing agriculture, which is basically trying to push large scale agriculture, questioning land reforms, some of the reforms which Narendra Modi was talking during the COVID package. If you land, laws, labor, and liquidity, these exactly are the words of the financial institutions, and these are the fights which the social movements will have to fight in tandem with other movements in the country, not just with the financial institutions, but also to the government of the country who have allowed this to happen.
Yes, Maju. In fact, these 4 L's that you mentioned at towards the end, they are for the 5th L, that is loot of the country and of the common people. So there are few more questions. Let me just quickly have a look at. Yeah, question is there for Anuradha from Ashokji. Has any support or loan come from European Union in COVID-related funding in India?
So basically, there are talks going on regarding this, but right now there is no particular funding that has come in. Though European Union did provide her 500,000 loan for euro loan for the cyclone, Amphan cyclone, but nothing in terms of COVID support has come right now.
Fine. There is one question for all the panelists. Anyone can volunteer, or all of you can briefly respond, by Lawrence Chaudhary ji. It is, panelists have talked about World Bank surveillance. But as we know that India has implemented social schemes through World Bank support. For example, National Nutrition Mission or Poshan Abhiyan to reduce the level of malnutrition. But at the same time, we have reports from Global Burden Disease reports, which talks about how India is going to miss it these Poshan Abhiyan targets. And funds are underutilized big time. Only Kerala has used about 25% of the funds as per our information. So how come we as a government ensure the transparency in that and accountability to the world? Anyone?
Yeah, can I answer? No.
Yeah, Sridhar.
Yeah, there are two aspects to it. One is what we have been finding, over the years and particularly in the last decade. Like the moment a government changes, right? These are loans which continue to exist. The moment a regime changes, for instance, currently you take the case of Madhya Pradesh. What all the earlier government was doing, whoever was the contractor, whoever was doing some activity, that's all frozen and new people are brought in. So we find time and again, in many of our activities, like, we find periodic disruption of how things happen. So second is, in our larger, need, for instance, when we talk about malnutrition or child health or things like that, the investment that we as a country have to make is needs to be much higher than what we can get as loan from World Bank or something like that. So whatever loans we get, they will only be marginally helping, and that's what if you look at the underlying theme of what Maju and Anuradha and I have been saying is, like, the trend is being changed by the World Banks, but ultimately what our governments are doing is they are messing up the implementation of it also, and not investing adequately in those sectors. And we are going to find more and more of this problem, because uh, henceforth there won't be anything that is as grant or even as easy loans. They'll be all leveraged through other kind of private equity players or other players, so the interest rates are going to be also very significant. So it begs to ask, what are we doing with our huge budget? Where are our priorities? And if you look at the last year, close to about 5 lakh crores of taxes have been given off to concessions have been given off to corporates in the name of incentives or other kind of things. So I think we have to choose our priorities first and address them, and not be driven by because ultimately the World Bank or any of them are going to look for markets only.
Fine. We have about half an hour or so where we can, rather than going for question answer, we can try and discuss the important aspect of this webinar, where having understood this situation, maybe since we accepted the globalization since 90s, as some of the speakers have mentioned, this has already begun and we have been fighting against it. But the more important aspect of whole process is the COVID cover that is being used. And during the days of Corona, as we have watched, seen for last 3 months, सबसे जरूरी चीज है कि कहने की कि भाई डरो ना, अभी रास्ते पर आ सकते हैं कि नहीं, किस तरह का मूवमेंट खड़ा कर सकते हैं, लेकिन अवेयरनेस बिल्डिंग ऑन दीज इश्यूज इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. Secondly, vaccine for corona may be found out anywhere in the world and it will be useful for everyone. But vaccine for this infiltration of IFIs in India and policies to be developed by Indian government and participation of the people in pressurizing them, that whole thing has to be developed by us only, people's movement and NGO sections and various trade unions and different organizations with youths and women and all progressive groups will have to come together. Even we may have to reach to the parliamentarians, different political parties, how they can take up this issue and how they are looking at it. Because under the cover of COVID, and when we are talking about on one hand the health structure to be built up at emergency level, looking at the cases increasing. On the other hand, the problem faced by the downtrodden, including migrant laborers and others, this important aspect of who is financing all this, like when Sridhar and Anuradha were listing, almost all the announcements that finance minister and prime ministers have been making in last 1 month regarding relief are sourced from these international financial institutes. So which is, how are we looking at it? Even the language that is normally being used by these people is so misleading, and therefore making aware to the common people, even the bhaktas, those who are totally surrendered to this government on communal front, even these financial matters, how to take them, these things to them, is going to be very important, and more work is there for institute like CFA and for all of us. So on that front, if any of you, many people are here now who can suggest something how to take this issue further and what kind of strategies need to be done, built up amongst us to fight this attack. Please, forum is open. Anybody can start. Even this health section, health sector privatization, digitalization of education system, where this All India Forum for Right to Education is also fighting, Anil Sadgopal and others. Many such issues are going to come up with this funding. The kind of 7,000 reforms that already have been agreed, some such figure was mentioned by one of the speakers. All these things are going to come up in different sectors. So how are we going to take it? Yes, sir.
First thing is the privatization, especially in the health sector and health education both, has been pushed on us for a long time, and as health rights movement we have been fighting against it. So these financial loans are another way of imposing it, and we must strongly oppose it. Jana Swasthya Abhiyan is doing something, so I won't go into the details, but I just want to flag it. And similarly, bringing up technology, and especially the software technology, as the answer for everything, including primary education, is something which is strongly objectionable. So those two fronts we must fight. How we'll discuss later. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Suhas, for this input.
I just wanted to suggest a couple of things. One,
Yeah.
I think we need to find the ways of how do we deepen this issue of money. What we have been noticing, nobody is questioning why the banks are lending, even our local banks, why they are lending and to whom they are lending. We tried to understand, in some of the districts, where like in Rajasthan and other places where local banks are willing to fund not a small women's self-help group, but is very happy to lend for a tractor for someone who is actually going to steal sand from the river, or for a JCB. So I think we have to deepen this. I think Maju and Rajesh have been talking about it for long, Priya. That how do we deepen this? Questioning of where is the money being put in? And because unless we start asking that question with our own agencies, the pressure on the international banks is not very easy, because they ultimately now, with the from the 90s, the country strategic program, they say it is the country, and growingly now, half the manpower in these banks are also our people, right, who have studied in our IITs and IIMs and IRMAs who are sitting there. So we need to find a way how we can deepen this as to how Indian banks, Indian governments are investing money. And mostly my own experience in the social sector has been that we have been concerned more about other social aspects and not looking at money in the way it's being used by the state and the banks especially.
Yes, Sridhar.
Just to add to that, I mean, it is definitely very important to keep challenging the bank and these institutions and keep questioning and not take them for their face value. And that is something that uh, movements and have been doing, activists have been doing for a very long time in India, and probably it can go a little less and high. It would depend, but it has been that we have been challenged. One of the conversations that just to take forward from where Sridhar has left, I think we have had conversations of a parliamentary oversight over these international funds time and again, and I think it is essential. It is essential because what we are now seeing is that these loans are not for any particular project. These are policy loans that are coming in. There are state partnerships that are being formed. So we are intrinsically seeing massive reforms happening. Our policies being changed, and not in a very apparent manner. It is very underlined. It is creating parallel structures and making the old structures defunct, which is extremely problematic. And I think somewhere we need to take this conversation of parliamentary oversight further.
Yeah, I think other day I was discussing with CFA friends, like even Medha was there in that discussion. Have we made any efforts to reach out to the parliamentarians, at least the main opposition parties, with this small note on whatever is happening? Like they may be aware, they may be party to it also, many of them, but at least left parties and other, like what is happening in Kerala. So have we done it, or can we do it? Like this is one forum where demanding some discussion in the parliament and making parliamentarians aware of that sort. Yes, Maju.
Amit's hand is also up.
Okay, after Maju, Amit can.
Okay. One thing which we also have to see is to open a simultaneous front at the state level and at the city level, because funds and World Bank funds are coming not just to national governments, it is coming to the cities, it is coming to the states, and rewriting statutes, influencing states and cities to become market friendly, invite international finance, and World Bank is doing that work to help make that. So we have to start a simultaneous front at the state and city level, and much of our earlier interventions were at the national level. So that's one thing which I needed to point out.
Perfect. Amit.
तो मुझे मेरा इंटरेस्ट ज़्यादा राजनीतिक शिक्षा में है, पॉलिटिकल एजुकेशन के एस्पेक्ट में। तो जो लड़ाई की बात आप कर रहे हैं, कुछ लोगों ने कह रहे हैं, तो मुझे लगता है कि एक प्री रिक्विजिट है कि जो ये सारी जो बातें हैं और ये सारी जो समझ है जो इसमें विकसित हो रही है, और एक तरह से जो सीनियर कार्यकर्ता हैं, लीडर्स हैं, उनमें होती है, वो समझ को पूरे जो संगठन, बहुत सारे संगठन आजकल फॉरेस्ट राइट्स, लैंड राइट्स, कोई फिशरीज, अलग अलग तरह के मुद्दों पे काम कर रहे हैं, उनमें ये समझ कैसे जाएगी, उसका हमारे पास बहुत बड़ा मुझे ज़रूरत लगती है। हम लोग इस काम में लगे हुए हैं, लेकिन मटेरियल की बहुत बड़ी कमी लगती है। तो जैसे ये पूरी बात है कि ये फाइनेंस, कैपिटल, ये सारी बात बहुत आसान नहीं है समझना, जिसको कुछ नहीं पता ABCD इकोनॉमिक्स का। तो कैसे हम इसको बहुत साधारण भाषा में, रीजनल लैंग्वेजेस में मटेरियल डेवलप करने का मुझे बहुत ज़रूरत लगती है। अभी जैसे पीछे दिनों में ये कोल का बात हो रही थी, तो कोल की बात को लेके बहुत सारे आर्टिकल्स हैं, लेकिन जब भी मैं सोचता हूँ कि मैं गांव के कार्यकर्ताओं को समझाना है तो फिर मैं एक अलग भाषा मुझे यूज करनी पड़ती है और उन कॉन्सेप्ट्स को बहुत ज्यादा ब्रेक डाउन करके फिर बताना पड़ता है। तो वो जरूरत मुझे लगता है कि बहुत इम्पोर्टेंट है, क्योंकि जब तक ज्यादातर लोग ये बातों को नहीं समझेंगे, बदलाव मेरे हिसाब से आना बहुत मुश्किल है। मतलब अभी ठीक है। और दूसरा बात है, क्योंकि ये पूरी प्रक्रिया भी जो फंडिंग के आने से, वो वर्ल्ड बैंक और ये सारे फंडिंग केवल सरकारों को नहीं आई है, हाँ, ये हमारे पास भी आई है। बहुत सारे जो एक्टिविस्ट को एनजीओज में भी, डेवलपमेंट सेक्टर में भी ये फंडिंग आई है। और इस फंडिंग ने मेरे हिसाब से जो एक काम किया है वो ये है कि इस पूरे डेवलपमेंट सेक्टर को कुछ सेक्टर्स में बांट दिया है ना। तो हम है कि हम विमेन्स एक्टिविस्ट हैं, हम फॉरेस्ट राइट एक्टिविस्ट हैं, हम वाटर एक्टिविस्ट हैं, हम सारे के सारे एक सेक्टोरियल हैं। अगर आप इसके पहले का परिदृश्य देखें तो ये था कि जो पुराने लोग हैं उनका एक राजनीतिक और समग्र समझ है कि वो पूरे समाज को कैसे बदलाव आएगा, पूरा जो अर्थव्यवस्था चल रही है वो कैसे खराब है। और समझ हम सबकी भी यही है कि कुछ जैसे आज के इससे समझ आ रहा है कि भाई जब सारी चीजें स्टेम हो रही हैं इस वर्ल्ड बैंक लोन से, सारे मल्टीनेशनल लोन से और उसकी कंडीशनैलिटीज से, ठीक है, लेकिन ये बात का जो ये जो बात है ये हमारे स्ट्रगल्स में रिफ्लेक्ट कैसे करती है। तो मुझे लगता है वो हम फिर जब हम अपनी लड़ाई फॉरेस्ट की लड़ते हैं तो हम इसी में खुश हो जाते हैं कि मुझे फॉरेस्ट का पट्टा मिल रहा है कि नहीं मिल रहा है, ठीक है। और उस लड़ाई को लड़ने के लिए हम लोन्स और फंडिंग प्रोजेक्ट्स कहाँ से ले रहे हैं, वो यही सारे सिस्टम में से आ रहे हैं हमारे पास। तो मुझे लग रहा है कि एक एस्पेक्ट जो मुझे बहुत बार दिनों से लग रहा है कि जहां भी लड़ाई चल रही है वो हमारा मुद्दा जो स्थानीय मुद्दा है वो तो है ही, क्योंकि उसके बिना आप कैसे लोगों को जोड़ोगे, लेकिन उस मुद्दे के साथ उन लोगों की इस बड़े तंत्र की समझ पैदा करना वो मेन काम है, राजनीतिक काम है कि जो भी मुद्दा हो, चाहे वो डोमेस्टिक वर्कर का हो, लेबर का हो, कुछ भी हो, लेकिन उसका बड़े तंत्र की समझ कैसे विकसित होगी उन संगठन के सदस्यों में, कार्यकर्ताओं में। एक ये बात है। और दूसरी बात है कि जब हम सड़क पे भी जाते हैं या कहीं भी हम कहते हैं कुछ, तो हम ज्यादातर लोग ये नहीं कहते कि हम इस पूरी आर्थिक व्यवस्था के खिलाफ हैं। हम हर समय कहते हैं कि वन कानून को बदलो, लेबर लॉ खराब है ना, ये क्यों हो गया। तो हम हर समय हमारा, अब वो जो भी शायद लड़ाई की वो जरूरत भी होती है कि आप एक मुद्दे पे लड़ रहे हो तो उसको फोकस करना है, लेकिन एक लंबे समय एक राजनीतिक चेतना पैदा करने के लिए मुझे लगता है कि ये हर लड़ाई को ये कहना जरूरी है कि हम इस आर्थिक तंत्र के खिलाफ है ना, जो 90 से चल रहा है, जो स्ट्रक्चरल एडजस्टमेंट है, जो तरह तरह के नाना वो दारवादी है, वो जो भी नाम से, क्योंकि हमारी सारी लड़ाइयाँ उसी से जुड़ी हुई हैं और सारी मुसीबतें वहीं से पैदा हो रही हैं। तो लंबे समय के लिए ये चेतना लोगों में कैसे आएगी। तो फिर जब जंगल की लड़ाई होती है तो ज्यादातर लोग हम भी उसमें आ जाते हैं कि देखो पर्यावरण खराब हो रहा है। अभी कोल की जो पूरी मामला है उसमें ज्यादातर बात क्या आ रही है कि सिर्फ फॉरेस्ट एनवायरनमेंट का प्रॉब्लम है। सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने कुछ कहा था वो गलत है। ये पूरा एक तंत्र का हिस्सा है ना। इस लूट को जो आप कह रहे हो उस लूट को चलाने का ये एक पूरा हिस्सा है और ये इसलिए बंद होना चाहिए क्योंकि ये लूट बंद होनी चाहिए बड़े स्तर की। इसलिए वन कानून गलत है, इसलिए लेबर लॉ गलत है, इसलिए सारा कुछ गलत है। तो ये चेतना तो हम आम लोगों में नहीं डाल रहे हैं। मुझे लग रहा है हम हर समय एक मुद्दे की बात कर रहे हैं। तो ये दो बातें मेरा ऑब्जर्वेशन है।
अमित, आपके लिए काफी कमेंट्स आए हैं पार्टिसिपेंट से कि आपने बुनियादी बातें रखी है और ये बहुत सनातन भी है। बहुत सालों से हम इस मुद्दे से जूझ रहे हैं कि लोकल इशू, वन पॉइंट इशू या वाइडर पॉलिटिकल रियलिटी और उसको एड्रेस करना। लेकिन ये डायलेक्टिक्स है या ये जो द्वंद्व है उसको संभलना पड़ेगा, समेटना पड़ेगा और हमको एक व्यापक परिप्रेक्ष्य में सभी मुद्दों पे लड़ने वाले लोगों को इसमें इकट्ठा लाना पड़ेगा। यही बात है और उस पर शुरुआत होगी वही अवेयरनेस की, क्योंकि इकोनॉमिक्स जैसे आपने कहा ये माना जाता है कि ये हमारा केक नहीं है या हमारी रोटी नहीं है, वो भी उसको भी बदलना पड़ेगा और ये बातें सरलता से कैसे पेश की जा सकेगी। और नॉट ओनली कार्यकर्ता, ये संगठन चलाने वाले, आंदोलन चलाने वाले प्रमुख साथी, उनको भी इसके बारे में सचेत करना पड़ेगा। बहुत बुनियादी मुद्दा रखा है। और किसी को बात रखनी है?
नहीं, इसमें ये एक मैं कह देता हूँ, एक थोड़ा सा मैं और जोड़ देता हूँ कि ये मौका हमारे लिए भी है। तो मैं कह रहा हूँ कि मोदी से मैं एक चीज सीख रहा हूँ कि वो कैसे अपने भक्तों के लिए बोलता है ना। तो ये मौका हमारे लिए भी है कि हम कुछ हमारे लोगों के लिए भी एड्रेस करते हुए बोले, हम सिर्फ
बिल्कुल,
सरकार को ना बोले।
और किसी को कुछ बात जोड़नी है, कहनी है, कोई अलग मुद्दा या इसी मुद्दे को लेकर? एनीबडी? फाइन। तो मुझे लगता है कि ये एक जिम्मेदारी आज की चर्चा से, इस चर्चा को में बात रखने वाले मज्जू हो, अनुराधा हो या श्रीधर या लियो नहीं आ पाए, उनसे भी, सीएफए के साथियों से भी एक जरूरत जरूर होगी कि हमको इसका साहित्य सरल भाषा में तुरंत उपलब्ध करना पड़ेगा। एनएपीएम जैसे संगठनों की जिम्मेदारी है जरूर, जो एनएपीएम में डिस्कशन हो चुका है, कि हम लोग एक व्यापक राजनीतिक स्तर पर इस मुद्दे को कैसे उठाए, और सिर्फ सेक्टोरियल नहीं। जैसे परसों हम एजुकेशन की बात कर रहे थे कुछ साथियों के साथ, तो स्कूल चलाने वाले लोग डिजिटलाइजेशन ऑफ एजुकेशन वगैरह वगैरह बात कर रहे थे। इसका एक व्यापक पॉलिटिकल इकोनॉमिक परिप्रेक्ष्य है जिसमें ये चीजें आ रही है, और उसको समझना पड़ेगा और उस पर हमको अपनी भूमिका लेनी पड़ेगी। ये बातें उन तक भी पहुंचाने की हमने कोशिश की थी, तो यही सभी सेक्शन में करना पड़ेगा। तो ये काम हम शुरू करें अपनी अपनी संगठनों में, अपने अपने आंदोलनों में, और ये साहित्य भी तुरंत हम उपलब्ध कराने की कोशिश इसमें सोच सकते हैं। जो
सुभाष लोमटे जी बात करना चाहते हैं।
बिल्कुल, सुभाष जी।
नहीं, मुझे बिल्कुल एक छोटा सवाल।
बताइए।
मेरा आवाज आ रहा है क्या?
हाँ, आ रहा है सुभाष जी।
हाँ, जो अनुराधा जी ने जो कहा, जितने भी लोन आए हैं, क्या वो हमारे गवर्नमेंट ने अप्लाई किया था और फिर बाद में सैंक्शन हुए? अप्लाई करते समय कितने का अप्लाई किया था और फिर उसमें से कितना सैंक्शन हुआ? इसका कुछ ब्यौरा हम उपलब्ध हो सकता है क्या? जितने भी वर्ल्ड बैंक है,
एडीबी हो, एआईआईबी हो, जो भी
जितने भी ग्लोबल इंस्टीट्यूशन, फाइनेंशियल इंस्टीट्यूट्स है, वहां से जो लोन हमको आया पिछले 4 महीने में, उसके लिए हमने अप्लाई किया था क्या, और कितने लोन के लिए अप्लाई किया था? तो उसका कुछ मालूमात मिल जाती है तो ठीक होगा।
सुभाष जी, कैन आई आंसर?
Anybody who has information on this, please.
Subhash ji, ऐसा है, all these banks are waiting for some countries to take loan. आजकल जो है बहुत ही वो लोग खस्ते हालत में हैं। मतलब if you see, I'll give you the example of what is happening with Reliance today. You are finding that they are getting money from various people, from the market. So those who are credit worthy, उनको जो है लोन देने के लिए लोग तरस रहे हैं। अभी हाल ही में एडीबी के कई सीनियर लोग बोल रहे हैं कि हमको ये एआईबी और न्यू डेवलपमेंट बैंक आने के बाद और भी कंपटीशन हो गया है, और लोग कहते हैं कि हमारे जो सेफगार्ड्स है वो बहुत टफ है, इसलिए जो है मुश्किल हो रहा है हमको लोन पिलाने के लिए। तो जो सरकार मांग रही है, उसीलिए तो देखिए मैंने मेरे प्रेजेंटेशन में बताया कि अप्रैल मई में जब लोन मिला तो हमारे सरकार ने उनको कहा कि मैं जनवरी से उसका खर्च दिखाऊंगा, चाहे वो गांधीनगर का शो के लिए लिया होगा या जो है आपके एनआरसी के इसको रोकने के लिए खर्च किया होगा, हमें पता नहीं। So the lenders are in a situation where they want to give loans to big countries like India, Indonesia. तो यही हालत है आज के दिन में।
ये दोनों बाजू से है, देने वाला खड़ा है चौपाल पे, लीजिए, और ये हमारे लोग भी जाके उनसे ले रहे हैं, ये इस तरह का है। और कोई साथी? बढ़िया। तो ये इसमें एक महत्व की बात जो आई है कि ये सिर्फ किसी सेक्टर से लेके मुद्दा नहीं है, किसी एक विशेष समूह के साथ जिनसे हम काम कर रहे होंगे, महिला या फॉरेस्ट राइट या अन्य कोई इससे जुड़ा हुआ सवाल नहीं है। ऐसे किसी भी नेचुरल या अन्य किस्म के डिजास्टर के समय जो तैयार खड़े रहते हैं बाजार में, अपना बाजारूपन लादने के लिए, बेचने के लिए भी नहीं, लादने के लिए, और मदद के नाम से ये एक्चुअल में जो लोन थोपा जाता है, और हमारे राजनीतिक जो कर्मी है वो भी उसको लेने के लिए तैयार होते हैं। ये जो मिली भगत है, ये समझना, साथियों को समझाना, और इस पर राजनीतिक पार्टियों को भी इसमें लाना, संसदीय पहल इसमें हो, इसके लिए कोशिश करना, और रास्ते पर की लड़ाई और कोर्ट स्तर तक कुछ लेके जा सकते हैं, इसका भी सोच बनाना, और इन सब के लिए एक सरल भाषा में इन सभी मुद्दों को लोगों तक ले जाना, ये एक तरह की चीज आवश्यक है। ये पहलू इसमें आया है। और जैसे मैंने कहा था कि कोविड का वैक्सीन तो कहीं ना कहीं निकलेगा, लेकिन इस अपनी देश में ये जो बीमारी है उसका वैक्सीन हमें ही ढूंढना होगा और असरकारी बनाना होगा। मैं सभी पैनलिस्ट को धन्यवाद देता हूँ, CFA के दोस्तों को और बाकी आयोजकों को धन्यवाद देता हूँ, और जो लोग शरीक हुए 2 घंटे से उनको भी धन्यवाद देता हूँ। कोई अनाउंसमेंट होगी आयोजकों की ओर से तो वो कृपया करे और फिर ये कार्यक्रम वो खत्म करे।
Sure. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sanjay Bhai, Sridhar, Maju, Anuradha. I mean, thank you very much for the wonderful session. Thank you for all the questions and inputs. I mean, it was really nice to kind of see a lot of old activists here. I mean, old in the sense, not age, but years of experience. Good to see their inputs and everything. The next session would be on urban sustainability, practice, challenges, and way forward. Rajendra Ravi, Professor Geetam Tiwari of IIT Delhi, Nishant of People's Resource Center, and Raju Bisay of Yuva would be the speakers and would be moderated by Madresh Kumar of NAPM. Please join us on Tuesday, 11 o'clock. Please share this information with others and encourage others to kind of join these conversations. And we look forward to getting your inputs and participation in future as well. Thank you very much. Stay safe.
Thank you. Zindabad.
Thank you and Zindabad.